So again, welcome, welcome. This is Networks in Action, inclusive facilitation in networks. So if you scroll down to this slide 5, you'll see the format for today. We're in the midst of closing out this welcome and check-in. And in a second, I will move into a brief presentation. So the idea for these sessions, so we follow the same format and we try to unpack different topics. So we work through this sort of modified liberating structures format of 3 questions: what, so what, now what. The idea is for us to define the topic, then talk about its implications, and then talk about what we're taking away. What does that mean to us? Where are we going from here? So the way that we start these conversations is, and you'll see lots of slides here, with a summary. We start with a summary of the responses to the registrations for the event. So you may recall that when you registered for the event, you shared your thoughts in response to some questions about inclusive facilitation and inclusion in your networks. So we have, I have summarized that here, and I'm going to start with that. Once we go through that brief presentation, hi, Lise. Here's the shared slides that we're in. We're just getting started. Once we're finished with this brief presentation, we're going to do some very short breakouts to just have some conversation moving through these steps. So we're on slide 5 for the agenda, moving through the steps of, again, what, how do we think about, how do we define this topic? So what are the implications for it? Now what? Where do we go from here? So those are our steps, and we'll do brief breakouts on the what and the so what elements of this. And then we'll have just a group discussion at the end. And if you don't, for some reason, I know there's a couple folks perhaps just listening in. If you don't want to be in a breakout group, let me know. Send me a message in the chat so that otherwise I will put you in groups because that's how this goes. But if you really don't want to be in one, let me know. So when we get to that portion in a second, I will know. All right, so as promised, brief presentation. This is a summary, synthesis summary, as you will, of the responses from the registrations to the questions you may recall, which are listed at the top here. So again, this is my attempt to just synthesize in summary a little bit without overthinking any of it and try to feed you back what your colleagues shared. And there were lots of responses, and so we have lots of slides here. You can also feel free to download these slides and have this information available to you if you'd like. But so the responses to this first question of what does inclusive facilitation mean within your network? As I looked through these responses, I sort of organized this in 2 frames, and you see those on slide 6 and 7. So one framing was in response to that question was the what. What does that mean? What is the definition of that inclusive facilitation? And then and that's slide 6. And then in slide 7, you see the how. So it was more of an action-oriented, how do we get there? What does it look like to us? So that's there, again, lots of different ideas here, but that's kind of how I framed it. This is not rocket science kind of approach here. I'm sure all of this could be moved around and organized differently. This is just to help us sort of wrap our brains around it. So you see a lot in that what slide of what does inclusive facilitation mean, a lot around making sure people are included, that voices are heard, spaces are safe and diverse with respect, interaction, equal opportunity. So lots of those components and elements and dynamics within inclusive facilitation for us. And reflected, of course, in the how of, in particular, this top one of the how, that facilitation creates a safe space for everybody, all voices, all diverse voices to be shared and heard. There's some asterisks at the end of that because it was repeated multiple times. So that was something that came up a lot for folks. And then some other ideas around empowering each other, having some leaders who can help engage and include folks, being anti-racist, having tools and methods, that help us address issues, providing, again, space for people to share in facilitation and ownership, things of that sort. So again, this response, the responses to this question of what does it mean? What does inclusive facilitation mean? We're sort of in these two buckets of what and how. So then if we move down, we asked a question you may recall about methods that you may have used or seen either as a facilitator or as a participant for enabling more voices to be heard. So there were lots of ideas here. You see slides 8, 9, and 10 with lots of ideas. I tried to separate these into two categories of more general, almost principled approaches, let's say, in slide 8. And then in slide 9, you have two slides of all the very specific ideas that people had about how they engage or the methods that they use when they are trying to be inclusive in their facilitation. So there were these general principles about co-creation and feedback, taking time, taking space, really encouraging others to engage as they feel comfortable, things of that sort. Again, these sort of design approaches and principles even in the general sense. And then moving into the specifics, lots of good ideas here about just methods, approaches, again, how to create spaces, how to that you should basically use a whole range of different methods, surveys, focus groups, community meetings, making sure you're following up, having different sizes of groups, having participants call on one another, opportunities for individual response, creating structures, things of this sort, a whole range of different things, right? And then there's also a link here. One of our registrants who is not here, in fact, he shared a link to a whole bunch of opportunities. So you might be interested in checking out, and opportunities, I mean methods, you might be interested in checking that out. So that was the response to the second question. In case everybody needs that link again, there you go. All right, so we went through the what, the so what, now we're on the now what. And we were asking about specific challenges to inclusivity and inclusion within your network. And again, I just tried to organize the thoughts that people shared, which were really had a great breadth and depth. This, again, you could organize these in lots of different ways, and some of the categorization could go differently, no doubt, but I tried to create some categories. So I threw some things into a category of challenges related to cultivating and managing diversity, and what that looks like and how people sort of struggle with that. Another category of managing dominance or power. So about how particularly how some individuals can come to dominate, or some voices can come to dominate spaces. You could even sort of move things between those two categories for sure. And these are, again, slides 11, 12, and then into 13. And there's just a final, looks like a tack on, but of course, trust is not a tack on, but instead really foundational and fundamental. But just that word without much elaboration or any elaboration came up a number of times in the responses from the registrants. So put that in there as its own challenge. So again, lots and lots of information here to work with and from, and that's the idea for this discussion, right? Is to be able to take this as a tool, move from there, have discussions as we will. Before we move into our process, into the what, so what, now what, any questions or reflections, anything you want to share based on, I know this is it's a lot of information in those slides. Anything that's coming up from you? And hi, Courtney, we're happy to have you. Okay. So still leaving some space if there's anything you want to share. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and put these little breakout rooms together, just in pairs, just to have a conversation for, say, 6 or 7 minutes in this first step of the what. So how do we think about, how do we define inclusive facilitation? And you have some ideas there to work from if you need some prompts, or if other things are coming up for you, that's just great. But how do we define this? What does it mean to you? So thinking about that, I'll open the breakout groups in just a second. It would be wonderful while you're having these discussions, if you can capture your thoughts in this slide 15. So part of why we use these shared slides is that it's a tool and a resource then for you all. You can download it, you can use it as you wish later, if that's helpful for you. And so we try to capture the ideas as we go. So we're going to just have 2 groups, just a little bit of conversation time to discuss the question of what does inclusive facilitation mean to you, and capture your thoughts, please, in that slide, slide 15. All right. So without further ado, unless there's anything else, okay, I'm going to open the rooms and we'll come back in 6, 7, maybe 8 minutes. I know it's never enough time. So we'll see you back in a few minutes. All right, welcome back. I see some notes in the slide that are very thoughtful and interesting. How did it go? Anything strike you, resonate with you, or not? What came up for you?
I really liked the observation that Courtney made that inclusive facilitation looks slower than other, and it takes more time and you need to be intentional. And when you've got your management pushing you for deadlines and trying to get things done, sometimes you need to, especially at the start of something, take the time to do it right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really appreciated Elise had shared about pre-facilitation and thinking about what are the barriers to folks even before they're arriving into an experience. And then having a consideration to the folks, not only that are participating in the experience, but the people who didn't show up and what might be some of the barriers to the folks who didn't show up. It's something I haven't spent a lot of time considering. So I really appreciated that.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts or anything else that struck you or resonated with you in particular?
We also talked a bit about like format and how to avoid getting straight into the traditional format of more lecture-y or one direction, like information or knowledge or content goes only in one direction, right? From the speaker to, and then how that affects people's engagement, and they can easily tune out, particularly if it's a virtual setting. So I think this is such a key element, and Amanda highlighted it very, very nicely. And to me, it was a very good reminder of not taking it for granted.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And for me, what also comes up with that is just how that sort of singular directional approach is really not what networks are about, right? That's really counter to how we could and should, how we need to be operating in a network. So, yeah. Rachel, was I interrupting you? You unmuted yourself?
No, I'm good. Thank you. This has been really interesting though.
Good. Well, the fun continues. We have another round here. We have another question. We have two other questions, in fact. So we're going to do one more set of these breakout groups. And I think I'm going to mix you up this time, new groups. And we'll go to this next question, which is the so what. So based on this conversation, based on what we were just talking about of the what, on the definition, what does inclusive facilitation mean? Well, so what? Then what are those implications for us? How do we adjust our practice or support others to adjust their practice, or our network at large to adjust its practice? What does that mean for us? What are those implications, right? So what? That's the next question. So we will do a similar process. I'm just going to recreate these groups. Good, here we go. And yes, please capture some thoughts in that next slide, and we'll do another just brief sharing afterwards. So I'm going to open the rooms, and we're going to that next question of so what. And we'll see you back in a little while. All right. And we have a newcomer. So I was catching her up. We're going through the slides. All right. Welcome back. Welcome back. And we have a newcomer, Joyce. Welcome, Joyce. Happy to have you here. She and I were just catching up. So pleased to have you here. Yeah, so go. How were your conversations? I see some notes in the slide. Thoughts, reflections? What was coming up for you?
I think we took the approach of talking about like the mechanics of how, and with Elise, we talked about sort of trying to figure out like one tool could be like, what are things that you can standardize across how you facilitate no matter who you're working with, and then what are things that have to be really customized depending on who you are working with, and then we talked about how it's important for those things that the things that are standardized, or like how you do it, is not only a best practice. It's not like a right or wrong. It's really what's right or wrong for you, because in any situation as a facilitator, you have to be comfortable and confident to execute it. So one standard like of creating an agreement with the group at the beginning of the process, like we all know that has to be done, but maybe how it's done is dependent on who's facilitating, like the manner in which it happens. So yeah, try to get to like some of the mechanics.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Other thoughts? Just my own other thought. Just on what you were just sharing, Courtney. I think that really resonates with me, because I like to kind of think big picture and to be able to have some sort of framing and also guidelines and sort of principles, and be able to, it's not check the box, right? But no, okay, I need to be able to do this and this in a principled way. And the specifics are context and audience and group specific perhaps, but to know, okay, I need to do, Kirsten, you need to do these things, right? And work through these processes. And that's going to get you likely, or at least most of the way, get you where you want to go. I find that very helpful. Okay, so now other thoughts. from others?
I was just going to say, what a thought that just occurred to me, and maybe this is like, oh, duh, but yeah, as you're facilitating conversations and trying to be inclusive and building the structures that like the guardrails that we talked about that do facilitate that inclusivity for the dominant voices, for those louder voices, it's going to feel like a lot of restriction and kind of like you're forcing them into kind of a more constricted kind of space. That thought hadn't occurred to me. Like, you know, when you go into a meeting, and I may have been in meetings and come out of them feeling like, well, they didn't let me, you know, didn't let me do what I wanted to do, didn't let me talk. And that may have been intentional. Just anyway,
Yeah,
something I hadn't thought about before. So
yeah.
There's this quote I heard recently that I was like, I don't know how I feel about the quote, but it articulates what you said, which is like equity looks like oppression to people who have always had privilege. like you know, there, you know, you can take it how you will, you know, that quote. But I think in this particular situation, it does, you know, you have to create those restrictions to make room for people. I think sometimes just being honest, like being direct about like, it's gonna feel, you know, telling people it's gonna feel like this, but this is why we're doing it, you know, articulating that clearly so that they understand the why versus just
Mhm,
feeling shut down.
mhm, mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Amanda, did you want to jump in?
Oh, yeah, I was just, well, to piggyback off of what Courtney had shared earlier, you know, we spent some time and I really appreciated Rachel sharing some tips in terms of structures and sort of how-tos and, you know, thinking about putting people into breakup groups with like really specific instructions or I really appreciated this thought around prior to doing that, giving people a minute or two to sort of digest the question, jot down notes before they're being put in a group to kind of engage. But, you know, I really appreciated some of the thoughts that she shared in terms of strategies for engagement.
I have this other idea that's coming up for me based on what you're all sharing, which is this idea that anytime you're in a group, I think I would venture to say anytime, it's always about compromise, right? So we want to get, you know, everybody to like 80%, but we're not going to get everybody to 100, right? It's just impossible, right? So sort of finding ways to be inclusive in our engagement and our processes, just the examples you just were saying, Amanda, giving people who need more time and space to give them a few minutes to allow them to digest in advance, things of that sort, right? Some people are really great off the cuff, some people are not, right? That's uncomfortable for them and it just makes them flustered or whatever it might be, right? But also back to which voices are heard and how do we sort of calibrate that and articulating clearly that when we're in this group, we are all compromising to get to the best collective outcomes, right? And we're going to try to get everybody as close individually as we can, but know that we can't get everybody to 100, right? We're never going to get there. So we're here to compromise. And that's what we do in groups. Yeah, that's just a thought that's coming up for me.
I can share something that came up for me from what we're all talking about is sometimes I feel like the structure of an individual meeting is like one piece of the culture building, but also it's like the collective structuring. And so thinking about, because this is coming up a lot with managing people who take up a lot of space or have strong or louder voices, is thinking about like when you are bringing in guest speakers, when you're, you know, doing different types of programming, like who are you asking to be the guest speakers? And if it's you know, always people who have like some type of seniority, whether it be professional status or, you know, years in the field, then when you come down to the micro level, those dynamics are going to, you know, show up, but like whose voices are valued. And I hadn't thought about that until now, is that's part of creating that culture. And it's a structure, it's a macro structure, it's a micro and macro structure, but that helps create the space for other meetings when people see, you know, who's invited to speak and bring expertise and who's not.
Yeah, I like that. What we demonstrate without meaning to, or recognizing that we do.
One thing that came up for me now, hearing what John shared, but also what Amanda was bringing about, like the tools or the methods that he used, is that I think there are ways for guaranteeing or helping to guarantee that everybody has a space and that the conversation doesn't get monopolized, that are not necessarily direct in saying now you should not take the microphone anymore, right? Or you should only use 30 seconds, etc. It's not restrictive, but it's the way that you set it up from the beginning, the way that you structure the conversations, and for example, in like giving people time to gather their thoughts, to think about what they wanna say before you even open the microphone, that makes it the starting point for everybody a little bit more even, right? Because those who need the time have had the time, and those who didn't need it, they could be thinking about what they will have for lunch. That's fine. But at least everybody has a little bit more of a similar starting point. Sharing first in pairs, etc. The other day I was reading, I have never tried this out, but I was reading about a technique where you pass the microphone around twice and everybody has 2 opportunities to talk. Of course, that requires time, but you don't have to, only if you want to. But at least you know that you're going to have 2 opportunities. You have to choose what are the 2 things you want to say. And everybody will have the 2 opportunities and they take it if they want. Maybe in the first time you're not ready, in the second round you will be ready, and then you share what you want to share. But I think there are ways to make it a bit more equitable on how much. And I think, to me at least, one very important thing that I try to remind myself is there are many different ways to participate, not only by taking the microphone and speaking up. You can participate by actively listening, having conversations after the meeting or the session. You can participate in writing, you can participate in sharing in a pair, etc. So it doesn't, not everybody feels comfortable to speak in front of a larger group. And that's not the only way. It doesn't mean, like, I think we sometimes think like, oh, the person didn't say anything, they were disengaged. Not necessarily. So also shifting our own way of looking at that, for me, it has helped at least.
Yeah, I love that. So we're coming up to the time here, as we do so quickly. Just any kind of final thoughts, or what are your key takeaways? This now what question? Where do you go from here? Is there something that you might try to integrate going forward, or just an idea you want to sit with longer, or anything that's kind of a key takeaway? Yes, Joyce.
Yes, sorry, let me put my camera back because my computer stays like this when I'm actually taking notes, so it doesn't make sense. Sorry, so I jumped in a bit late. Sorry, I was caught up in another meeting, but I was mentioning to Kirsten when we were speaking that sometimes what we do is that we try to incorporate, inform people into nonviolent communication. So some of the rules that brings a lot into like a culture in the organization to use those principles. And one other thing is if there are longer meetings, being them online, but especially face-to-face, what we do is that we make sure to create a space that is no longer than 30 minutes, which makes more sense face-to-face, but like to make collective rules. So we say, what are the rules that we are going to follow through this? And then of course stuff comes out, like let's be imaginative, let's be but also it comes out, let's not interrupt others, let's create the space so that others speak. And of course, when it's the group creating rules for themselves, there's much more ownership in it than if you just say, here are the rules for this conversation.
Thanks, Joyce. And I love the nonviolent communication. Great book, great approach. Love it, love it. Yeah. Other kind of key takeaways? Anything you're leaving us with today? No pressure.
Maybe you just shared to complement what Joyce was saying, something that Courtney shared in the breakout that I think didn't capture in the notes about this idea of having the agreements with the groups for groups that meet constantly, or that if you have different groups within the same network, having some sort of like general across the board agreements in terms of values, in terms of how we work together and how we treat each other, that are standard for everybody and that allows for some coherence and also helps in creating the culture of the network, while at the same time allowing for specific groups that are meeting to have additional elements or customized agreements for that specific meeting, for that specific group. So having both, like the balance between what is general and what is like our standard, we are always bringing these, and what are the things that we can make specifically for this space or for this setting, this group, right? And I thought that was a really nice way of looking at this group, the idea of group agreements.
Yeah. Okay, but I hold space, but don't want to put anyone on the spot either. So let's wrap this up. This has been a pleasure. I've learned a lot. I really appreciate you all being here, being present, engaging, sharing. Thank you so much. We always write a summary blog from these, so you'll see soon. We'll share that in probably our next newsletter. One just went out this morning. We do it every other Wednesday, so probably in the next one. So look out for that. Hope you're signed up for the newsletter. And yes, just so appreciative of all of you. If you ever want to reach out to me, you're more than welcome. Talk about anything, inclusive facilitation or otherwise. Here's my email address in the chat. But it's been a real pleasure, and I'm so pleased to see you all. I hope to see you again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.